Hello, and welcome to today's webinar on active shooter armed assailants response training for the DHS Run, Hide, Fight protocol, presented by our sponsor Heffernan. We're so happy you can join us. My name is Deb Beto, and I will be your moderator today and be monitoring questions you may have during the session. Before we open up the session, let's review a couple of key items. All of the webinar materials we've discussed can be found at the URL currently on your screen. I will be sharing this URL in a follow-up email, so don't feel like you need to write it down right now. If you have trouble with your internet connection during the webinar, we recommend leaving the presentation and logging back in. If you have audio difficulties or a telephone line goes dead during the call, hang up and call back again to the same number. If all lines go dead, watch the on-screen chat box for an alternative call-in number. Please feel free to ask questions or provide feedback by using the chat box or questions box during the webinar. If you are using a tablet, you may need to tap on the screen for the options bar to appear, and then you can select the appropriate option. We may not respond immediately, but we will work your questions or feedback into the presentation. If we can't get to your comment or question during the session, we will be online afterwards to respond, or we may follow up in an email if we run completely out of time. You may also email us at moderator@aspenrmg.com for up to 48 hours after the webinar. This will be a 1-hour presentation. Questions and comments are very much encouraged throughout, and the presenters will be answering questions at the end. And lastly, we have a number of webinars upcoming covering a variety of topics, including those listed at the Heffernan webinar website. In addition, we offer the mandatory Preventing Harassment training in English 3 times a year. With that, let's begin today's webinar, Active Shooter Armed Assailant Response Training for the DHS Run, Hide, Fight protocol. Today's interactive session will be facilitated by Dr. Steve Albrecht. Dr. Steve Albrecht is one of the country's leading experts on workplace violence. In 1994, he co-wrote Ticking Bombs, one of the first books on this subject. Since then, he has continued to write, speak, and train on workplace and school violence prevention, the value of threat assessment teams, and safety and security of all employees. His clients include Boeing, Nike, Halliburton, 120 California cities, and all 58 California counties. His background includes his work for 15 years as a police officer with San Diego PD. He holds a doctorate in business administration, an MA in security management, a BA in English, and a BS in psychology. He is board certified in HR, security management, employee coaching, and threat management. He has written 17 books on business, security, and law enforcement subjects. Dr. Albrecht, it's all yours. Steve, are you on mute by chance?
Thanks, Deb. Do you have my slides up, or do I need to post them onto the screen to copy them over? Or?
No, you need to have your slides up.
Okay, hang on just one second.
Okay. Thank you for your patience, everyone.
Okay, Deb, I think we're in business, yes?
All right. Looks like we're good to go. Sorry for that delay, everyone, but we should land right on track at the end. So thank you.
Thanks to everybody at Aspen Risk Management Group and the Heffernan Insurance folks for their help and support today, and for Deb's help and support. I'm Dr. Steve Albrecht. My claim to fame for this subject is I wrote the first book in the country on workplace violence back in 1994, a book called Ticking Bombs. I interviewed a double murderer for the book, a man that killed 2 people during a termination hearing in San Diego at General Dynamics. That happened in 1992. I interviewed him in 93, and then the book came out in 1994. If you look at the title screen for this, these perpetrators are on a path from ideas to actions, and that's really what we have learned in the almost 30 years that I've been doing this work. And these people are on a path from ideas to actions that start with some type of grievance. It moves into violent ideation, and from that point, they make a crossroads decision to go forth and do what they're going to do. I think one of the key focus points for you today in our conversation is not to be obsessed, as the news media tends to be, about motive. Why do people do these things? Why would they shoot up a school or a workplace or a mall or a church? And really focus on interrupting the opportunity. So our biggest conversation today is the discussion about how useful the Department of Homeland Security, DHS, protocol for workplace or school violence or mass attacks in public is, which is run, hide, fight. We'll talk about the variations of that concept. Keep in mind that we don't teach 4th graders to tackle people, and we don't want people to put themselves in harm's way that aren't ready to do so, like little kids and things like that in schools. But we teach adults in college and university programs and in workplaces and in public and private sector organizations about the run, hide, fight concept. That's the best thing we know in the rare possibility of one of these situations. The other unfortunate part is these things are happening more frequently. As a perspective, in 2000, we had 1 mass shooting in the United States at a software company in Massachusetts. In year 2019, moving into 2020, we're tending to average around 30 to 40 a year, which is really a disturbing concept, which we'll talk about as well. If I don't get to your questions, I'm certainly happy to talk about anything offline through my email, and you can certainly send either me an email at drsteve@drstevealbrecht.com or through the good folks at Aspen Risk Management. Deb, do we want to start with some poll questions?
Yes, we have a couple of polling questions here. I will launch the first one, and I will get the audience to participate. So our first polling question is, my company agency has a workplace violence prevention plan. Is this a yes, a no, or a don't know? And we want to encourage everyone to participate in this webinar, so I'm going to wait until about 80% of the people have voted, just to make sure that you're all up and running and everything's working okay on your end. And so we've got about 65% right now and still coming in. So Steve, 34% of the participants say yes, 45% say no, and the rest don't know.
Well, let's talk about that for a second. The workplace violence prevention plan for your organization does not have to be really detailed to go on for pages and pages. The good folks at Aspen Risk Management can help you with that in terms of creating a policy. What we're looking for is an emergency response protocol that may go on top of whatever kind of security or safety policies that you already have in place. The workplace violence prevention policy would really look at the behavior of people who work there and also the behavior of people who come in, visitors, vendors, do business with. So there's really 2 perspectives. And then there's a third issue which needs to be covered in the policy, which is the domestic violence piece of it, which is sometimes employees have off-the-job issues which cross over to home, from home to work, and they bring domestic violence into the organization. As necessary, we have to have a response, especially for you folks in California. There's something called Senate Bill 400. Senate Bill 400 mandates a response to domestic violence involving an employee. That doesn't mean we can fire this person. And also it says that we have to treat them as a protected class, just like we would for sexual orientation or race or age or gender or military status. Things like that are now part of our discussion because some folks have home issues which cross over to work. And the other part of Senate Bill 400 is that if you have an employee with a domestic violence possibility coming to work, we have to set up a safety plan for them. Deb, the next question, please.
All right, let's launch the next one. My company or agency has shown some version of the Run, Hide, Fight video to employees as part of a training program or staff meeting. So this is either going to be a yes, a no, or a don't know. And again, I'm going to wait for about 80% of the people to respond because I want to make sure that everybody is listening to this webinar today and that all of your technologies are working just great. So we're up to 80. So see, 31% say yes, 63% say no, and 7% don't know.
Thanks for that. When we look at the Run, Hide, Fight protocol in this country, there's lots of ways that you can self-educate or educate as a group, especially as a staff meeting. There are two videos which are sort of the standard, and one I like particularly a little bit better than the other. The first one is the Department of Homeland Security and the City of Houston, Texas. They partnered with a video about 6 or 7 years ago, right after the Aurora, Colorado movie theater shooting called Run, Hide, Fight. If you put DHS and City of Houston, Texas into Google or into YouTube, it'll pop up. You'll see the video. The bad guy looks kind of like Vin Diesel, bald, shotgun, black clothing. We'll show a picture, a screenshot of that video. You can see what I'm talking about if you haven't seen it. I like the video a lot. It's about 6 minutes long. It's not bloody. It doesn't attempt to frighten people. It talks in pretty realistic and straightforward terms about what we need to do in the rare possibility of one of these events, Run, Hide, Fight. And then the second video is done by the California State University system, and I like it even better than the Department of Homeland Security video. I'll show you a screenshot for that video as well. If you put in Cal State University system, the screenshot will come up. It's a white background. It's an animation. It's a cartoon, not like Bugs Bunny, but kind of a different way of seeing the perspective. And I like it because I think it resonates with millennial employees quite well. I also think that it covers some of the same things in the Department of Homeland Security video, but in just a more practical and positive way. So either one of those videos I think are well worth your time in terms of the staff training or the individual training that you might do for yourself. I would also suggest that you can share it at home, age appropriate for the people in your house, maybe 14 or 15 years old and above, that would want to look at this and think about our response to a mass attack in public, at church, at the mall, at the movies, at a restaurant, at places we all tend to congregate. And so think about showing that at home, age appropriate, as one discussion point for keeping your kids and your family safe as well. So my claim to fame, again, besides the Ticking Bombs book in '94, is my work in this area over the last 27, 28 years in workplace violence prevention and the books that I've written. I also have a sub sort of category of protection that I provide to libraries, and it's interesting to me how a number of the problems in our world that happen kind of on the streets show up in the library, and that could be crime and violence and drugs and mental health problems and problematic homeless individuals and things like that are at the library. So I work a lot in what I would call high-risk human resources and security functions for public and private sector organizations, and I'm hoping that's who is on the call with us today. So we think sometimes about the value of training under stress, and one of the reasons that we train people in life-threatening situations like firefighters and cops and air traffic controllers and people like that is that we want them to respond under stress how they have been trained under stress. So this is not a stressful training, and I won't be terrorizing you or scaring you into compliance on these things that we're talking about, but it is important to pay close attention to why we want to do things under stress that we may not think about when it's a stressful situation. For example, just calling 911 may be a difficult thing in your organization because you have to dial 9 first to get an outside line. Now, that's not always possible in every phone system, but I've seen it. I've also seen phone systems where you have to dial 8 first, which I would never remember under stress. So we think about what we do on normal situations, and then we ramp up the stress in terms of the training piece, and we want to imprint, at least for you, the concept of the idea of run, hide, fight. If you look at this photo, this is a Southwest Airlines flight where there was a fatality. The engine exploded and the shrapnel killed this woman that was sitting on the wing. I just flew on these folks just the other day. And you look at everybody wearing their masks in this photograph during the emergency, and they all have their masks on wrong. If you've been on an airplane within the last 25 years, they tell you the same thing every time, which is put the oxygen mask over your nose and mouth and breathe normally. And these folks aren't doing it. And I'm a little surprised that some people had the wherewithal to take a selfie during this. And then the guy with the beard is still listening to his tunes, even though the plane is in obvious peril. So people go back to how they have been trained under stress. if you haven't been trained to think about these things, if you haven't sort of put yourself into the rare possibility of what you would do to leave your facility quickly, who you would bring with you, how you would get out of the building, if you're on the upper floor, how you would get down to a lower floor, or if you needed to get to an upper floor, if the bad guy is in between you and the ground, then what do you do for that? And then also, how do you think about the hideout part, which is the break room, restroom, conference room, supervisor's office, training room, bathroom, someplace that you can go with colleagues, with coworkers, with clients, vendors, customers, taxpayers, people you do business with. You can bring them along with you. Especially, you may have to think about the people that are in your circle of service who may have special needs or disabilities or mobility issues. How are you going to get them to a safe place to wait the arrival of the police? And then the third one, which we'll talk about, which is not very palatable, but which is necessary, is fighting back, and how we're going to do that. So if you think back to how you are trained in life, mostly it's habit and routine, but sometimes under life-threatening stress, we forget little things. I recall once I had to dial 911 for an emergency, medical emergency involving a family member. I was at this person's house, and I couldn't remember their address, even though I'd been there many, many times, and I had to go outside and actually look at the building to figure out what their address was. So, you know, I came from the police world, and I'm really good with other people's emergencies, but sometimes not my own. Think about, during life-threatening stress, what things that you have to do to remember what you need to do, and your coworkers. And some people don't have just fight or flight, but the middle one, which is the worst, which is freeze. So as an example, again, we talked about, is it easy to dial 911 from your phone system and get emergency help, or is there a 9 first before that? If you dial 911 on your cell phone, who answers? In the state of California, where I came from, it's the highway patrol. In other states, it may be the state police. In other states, it may ring to the sheriff first and then the police department. It may ring to the county fire agency, and then they dispatch over to the PD or sheriff. So one of the things you need to figure out fairly quickly, and when we get off of this webinar today, is who answers 911 in your particular location. If you have the benefit of really good phone systems and phone emergency services, it may be possible to get triangulation and have your 911 call on your cell phone go directly to where you are, your physical location. But a lot of phone systems don't have that. A lot of dispatch systems aren't that sophisticated around the country. Think about who answers the cell phone when you dial 911, since that's the one you're typically going to have. So I'm telling you, in terms of emergency response, if you have the choice between 911 on your landline versus 911 on your cell phone, choose the landline. Choose the landline because it has the address. If the phone lines are trunked into the building, it'll tell the first responders where you are, and also the likelihood of other people calling out on 911 on their cells and shutting down the network system could happen in an emergency as well. Think about, under stress, where you would go if there was an emergency: fire, mass attack, some type of emergency situation where you say, I always go out through this door, I always come in through this particular door, I always come and go through our building this way, through the lobby or through the rear entrance or whatever. What would you do if that entrance was blocked? It was blocked by the police, it was blocked by the bad guy. How would you come and go? So sometimes under stress, people get sort of a sense of routine about the way that they come and go through the building, and they can't actually think about how they would leave in another way if they had to. If you think about perpetrators in multiple floor buildings, you want to be off of the floor where the bad guy is. And we think about, some of these perpetrators are mobile, and they figured out how to move up and down elevators and stairways and things like that because they either work there or they've been inside the building before, or they just understand how the design is. We want to be able to secure certain parts of our building, and if you need to get to a higher floor, do that. If you need to get to a lower floor to get out, do that. Your intuition oftentimes will tell you what to do in these situations, but we want to make sure that you're trained up before you just rely on your intuition. So here's some things that may be kind of hard to talk about, but is really true. These are not hostage situations. These are not things that the police negotiators come in and talk to these perpetrators. They're there to kill people. The one thing that we know from these types of attacks is there is a clock that starts ticking inside these people's heads as soon as they get on the scene, and the clock that ticks in their head lasts for about 8 to 10 minutes before they know the police will come. In my day in the police department in San Diego, we would surround the building with a perimeter team and wait for the SWAT guys to show up and do what they would do. After Columbine, which we just had the 20-year anniversary last month, for Columbine, we don't do that anymore. Every cop in the United States is trained to the active shooter model, which is enter the building in teams of 2 to 6 and go after the perpetrator. So these are not hostage negotiation situations. You can't talk your way out of these things with these perpetrators. Their window of time, 5 to 10 minutes, 8 to 10 minutes is typically how much they have to go around the building and harm people before the police arrive. They know when the police get there, there's going to be some sort of shootout, whether they shoot the cops or they shoot themselves or that there's a gun battle. And we want to be out of the police officers' ways when that's happening. We also want to be out of the bad guy's way, which is why we talk about run and hide as our two first choices. So one of the things to think about for the police response, and this is sort of unusual when you consider your own agency where you happen to live or work, is that lots of cops are going to come to this event. When you think about the San Bernardino incident that happened about 5 or 6 years ago at the regional center in San Bernardino, where the husband and wife terrorism team came in and killed 14 people, 300 cops came to that situation. And they're wearing different uniforms from different agencies. And so you may have cops wearing tan shirts and green pants like the sheriffs do in California. We have cops wearing blue uniforms or black uniforms. It could be Border Patrol in green. It could be state police wearing khaki or tan. There's lots of police response where they're wearing different colored uniforms. They're carrying different weapons. They have sometimes riot shields, and they'll have cops in plain clothes and cops wearing suits and ties and cops, wearing beanies and hoodies and ball caps with their badges around their necks on a chain. So, sorry, one of the things that I figured out from the police response in various incidents that we've looked at around the country is lots of cops are going to show up. It's going to be very sort of unorganized and stressful situation, obviously. You have to be ready for and to teach your coworkers and your staff that the police response is going to be multivariate. It's going to be lots of different cops wearing different uniforms coming in. Follow their instructions, do what they tell you to do, and you're going to survive the event. So one thing that we learned after the Sandy Hook incident, where the perpetrator went in and killed the little kids at Sandy Hook Elementary School, was a lot of people, and we knew this before, but this really brought it home to us, a lot of people bleed to death in these situations. And they bleed to death because they can't get out of the building in time to get to where first responders, paramedics, firefighters are there to help them, because the police are trying to clear the building from where the bad guy is. So after the Sandy Hook shooting, a group of surgeons and trauma surgeons and physicians in Hartford, Connecticut got together to create something called the Hartford Protocol. The Hartford Protocol was a creation of a training program called Stop the Bleed. And you should be able to put Stop the Bleed into your search engine and find a Stop the Bleed training program in your particular city or county. Lots of healthcare organizations, clinics, and ERs and things like that teach this program. I've been through it. I went through it when I was in Colorado a couple of years ago. It's great. It's only an hour. It teaches you how to use tourniquets. And tourniquets are our best choice in terms of life-saving for people that have bleeding injuries. So when we look at accidents, car accidents, things like that, a tourniquet is a great thing to have in your first aid kit in your car. It would be useful to have if you put it especially inside your AED machines or your first aid kits in your own facility. So I've been through the training. I like it. I think it's great to go through. It just reminds everybody about the value of tourniquets these days. They're cheap. They cost about $10. I have one in my gym bag and in my car and lots of other places. They're very useful. You can put one on yourself if you had to save your own life, and that's part of the training as well. We also want to remind everybody that their ability to speak clearly in a stressful situation and provide as much information and be a good professional witness to the police and the dispatchers can be very useful for the responding officers who are getting information as they come forward in their cars. They're being told where this perpetrator is, what this person looks like, what type of weapon they're carrying, etc. So remind yourself and train your staff and coworkers to be as clear and as descriptive as possible with 911. Don't say there's a crazy guy in the lobby with a gun. That's maybe true, but you need to be as clear as possible when you're in a safe location to do so and describe what this person is doing so the cops know what to do when they get there. So I've talked a little bit about the run, hide, fight part, but the run, hide is obvious. Leave the building as quickly as possible, take as many people you can. Hide out inside some part inside the building where the perpetrator can't get inside. These people are not going to shoot through the door. They're not going to impersonate the police. We've never seen that. If they can't get inside because the door is locked or barricaded, they can't see inside, the door is fairly sturdy, you're going to survive the event because they're going to move on. Where we see these things happen is typically glass offices, open hallways, cubicle environment, things like that, where people are not able to hide. Sitting under your desk or playing dead on the floor is not the right thing to do. And really, here's why. These people are not Navy SEALs. They're not trained commandos. They're just dipsticks that have guns that live in their parents' basement. That doesn't make them warriors, and it doesn't make them invincible, and we can beat these people. Tell yourself, tell your colleagues that you can fight back and you can win. I'm a pretty tough guy. I'm tactically trained. I've written 6 books for cops on law enforcement. I wrote a couple of books on guns. I know a lot about all this stuff. 2 guys could knock me to the ground and hold me down until the cops got there. 3 of you ladies could knock me to the ground and hold me down until the cops got there. No problem. I'm a trained fighter, and you can still beat me because there's more of you than there are of me. When you look at these perpetrators, that just because they have a gun doesn't mean they're going to be invincible, and doesn't mean we can't stop them. And think about that as we go through our conversation today. It's not about putting your life at risk for no reason. It's about saying, I'm going to do whatever I need to do to go home from this event and see my family and my loved ones in concert and in support of my colleagues and coworkers around me who want to do the same thing. So because of the news media, this is an issue that creates a lot of fear with people. When you think of the news media's coverage of these events, whether it's a shooting we saw in Poway, California at the synagogue just recently, or if it happened at a school or a mall or another public place or a college or a university, it's easy to get staff concerns and fears over these issues where people are afraid to go to work or afraid to go to school as a result of the things that they have heard. When we look at this as a staff management issue, we want to educate and empower people to know that in the rare possibility that these things happen, we have a plan, and that plan is run, hide, fight. Just like we have for a fire drill, just like we have for a tornado or earthquake or hurricane or any other kind of emergency, a gas leak or anything that we have, there's an emergency response that we've talked about, at least in a staff discussion, or in an even better, and I'll discuss this as we go forward, that we trained for. When we look at how we train for these things, the idea of how we evacuate people that may need additional care because they have special needs or they have disabilities. I mean, even if you put a coworker who is disabled into a rolling office chair and wheel them out the door, that would be very useful. You may have to carry some people. It could be kids or the elderly or people that you provide services to, depending on your type of work and the clients and customers that you serve. So think about that as part of this discussion as well. We've talked a little bit about the police response, the intensity of the police response. There's going to be a lot of cops coming in, and they're going to be very, very focused on the bad guy first and then providing first aid second. And the reality of those situations is they're going to provide first aid to other cops, but not to us. And so we need to take care of each other and make sure that we get our people out of the facility and into the zone, the cooler zone, not the hot zone, where the paramedics can work on them. And in my perfect world, we would run a run, hide, fight drill without the fight part every year. And in my perfect world, we do a 10-minute drill or a 15-minute drill where you would say, okay, before we start business today, let's say we're going to do this on Thursday of this week, you have 2 choices. You can leave the building for 10 to 15 minutes, or you can hide out for 10 to 15 minutes inside the building. If I walk through during a sort of a security audit, and I had a clipboard with everybody's name on it, and I didn't catch you outside the building, and I couldn't get to you or find you inside the building, then you've done the drill successfully. After 10 to 15 minutes, go back to your keyboards, get back to your workstations, and get back after it. We want to have this drill in place because it reminds people, especially under stress, what they need to do. And then the last part, which is an important theme, is think about the trauma that is involved in one of these situations. Even if nobody is injured or killed, it's just somebody with a knife or a gun or another weapon who frightens a lot of staff. People are really traumatically affected by these things because of the obvious life-threatening connection to it. We need to have a mental health process in place, and that's typically done through your Employee Assistance Program, or EAP. I'm a big fan of EAP providers. I think they do really good work in terms of the post-traumatic stress debriefs that they can do, especially if they have some sort of visibility with the organization prior to this. They've been seen in educational programs where people know about Employee Assistance Program. But if you don't have an EAP provider, and most organizations of size do, that you can certainly get access to clinical resources through the county where you live. You can get access to private psychological resources as well, to say, these are people we need to bring in to do debriefs and to focus on preventing continued trauma with the people that survive these events. So this slide is just sad to me. This is November 9th, USA Today piece. The headline says 4 of the biggest mass shootings in 5 decades have happened in 2018. If you look at the 4 events that happened in 2018, Stoneman Douglas High, the Borderline Bar and Grill in Thousand Oaks, the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, Santa Fe High, Texas school shooting, the Baptist Church shooting in Texas in 2017, and certainly the Las Vegas concert massacre in 2017. It's really grim to look at these statistics and consider how far away we are from a solution to this problem. A lot of people who study this, like I do, again, are not focused on the motive piece, but they're focused on interrupting the opportunity. And that's about good physical security and good policies and procedures and humane treatment of people during our interactions with them, either from an HR perspective or as a customer or client. And then we're having an awareness about what in my business we would call leakage. And leakage is when these people talk about what they're going to do. And here's the interesting part. They don't threaten the target. They don't tell the person they want to harm directly what they're going to do. They tell other people. And we refer to that as third-party threats. If you hear third-party threats, that is a significant warning sign that you need to talk to the safety and security stakeholders in your organization. The safety and security stakeholders in your organization could include HR, security, if that's a function or a department in your organization, risk management, the company attorney or agency attorney that you have, the department directors, the board of directors, the senior leadership. These people are the folks that are in charge of keeping us safe. And we need to have a conversation with them, especially in the stakeholder positions, if we hear about this kind of leakage from somebody about what they are planning to do. So this scope of the problem is really kind of depressing to me because it suggests that this problem is getting worse and not better. When I started working in this area in the 90s, it was really sort of a post office issue where the phrase going postal came from. Now we see it everywhere. And it's disturbing to me that we're still talking about this in 2019. So if you look at an FBI study here of workplace and school violence, one of the sort of comforting realities, if you can find some comfort in this issue, is that almost 45%, a little bit over 45% of these issues involve robbery. So those are 55% are typically schools and churches and malls and government or military or public places where these things happen. But 45% of workplace violence is robbery, and that should give you some sense of hope that you say, well, I don't have the type of business where people are most likely to come in to my organization and rob me. It's just not the type of company that we have. We don't sell jewelry or gasoline or donuts. So the more likelihood you have of a higher risk type of industry like something that you have nighttime work or retail is the higher likelihood of workplace violence, as opposed to the other things that the other 55% are split up across a number of categories. I belong to a group called ATAP, the Association of Threat Assessment Professionals. We have a website called atapworldwide.org, so that's ATAP worldwide.org. ATAP is a group of other professionals like me in security and human resources, police, prosecutors, psychology, psychiatry, parole, probation, private security, corporate security. A lot of people in mental health and in law enforcement and security, HR work together. A group of about 2,000 folks across the country. We have about 14 chapters in almost every major region in the United States. We have a Canadian chapter, a European chapter, and an Asian chapter. We focus on domestic violence, workplace violence, school violence, and terrorism, and stalking. And we look at these subjects we've been looking at for almost over 28 years now. These people have got together and we have a model which we call the pathway to violence. Again, I talked about it briefly. It starts with a grievance, it moves to the violent ideation, and then this person is off to the races in terms of their planning and preparation, and they boundary probe and they attempt to make contact with the target in the organization, and then they take their final act. The interesting part to me is the grievance and the violent ideation could take months or even years. Once they cross that sort of crossroads and begin the research and planning and pre-attack preparation, and they tend to move pretty quickly. And then the other two parts, if you look to the right of this model, is how hard it is for us to sort of figure out or predict the future. Certainly we cannot predict violence, but can we at least agree that how we treat people with humanity and dignity, how we set up physical security boundaries, and we use good security policies and procedures, cameras, panic alarms, locking doors, locking offices, workplace violence related policies, showing people the run, hide, fight videos, asking people to participate in a run, hide, fight drill can really de-escalate the possibility of workplace violence or school violence. Escalating these possibilities is how this person sees themselves as a victim, how they have a desire for revenge, how they've been brokenhearted or terminated. So there are lots of things that sort of move up and down the scale in terms of escalation versus de-escalation, some of which we know about or can control and some of which we cannot. So oftentimes I'm asked by the news media why these people do what they do. And the simple answer is they have what's called, the clinicians call the broken bridge of self-esteem. The broken bridge of self-esteem says I don't care about myself and I don't care about anybody else. I literally hate myself and I literally hate other people. So they're disconnected from society, they're disaffected, they're depressed. Depressed people can be dangerous to themselves and others in certain situations. They cycle on and off their antidepressant or anti-anxiety medications without a doctor's care. They may have typically very difficult family situations. And one of the characteristics we see a lot is no father figure, nobody that's told this individual not to do what they do and given them any sense of structure, how to live their life without violence as a choice. They have a desire to get revenge against somebody who fired them or broke their heart or treated them poorly, and this makes them dangerous. They have early psychopathy. We typically see that as somebody who is over 18 where it's diagnosed. This is early psychopathy symptoms, which are typically antisocial symptoms earlier than 18. They're narcissistically entitled. The world revolves around them. They have depression. Outwardly, they may be functional, but inwardly they hate themselves and others, and they don't have any sense of empathy. So this quote from one of these perpetrators is just so spot on. It's disturbing. I want to outdo my idols, which is they idolize these people who have done these things. They're survivors, the ones that are in jail. I want international attention, which unfortunately we give to them. We look at the Poway synagogue shooting just the other day. The rabbi who was injured has already been to the White House and been all over television around the world. I want to be infamous. Lady Gaga is famous. These people want to be infamous, and you can only kill me once. And my actions will live on and on even after I'm dead or in jail. And that's difficult to beat, especially in a culture where we give these people almost instantaneous media coverage. So I wrote this manifesto of a mass attacker, and I think about this for how these people have done this. This is sort of my kind of sense of how these people see the world that they live in, the things that they use to kind of give a sense of why they want to do what they do. I've lived a depressed, disconnected, disaffected life with no real job, girlfriend, supportive family structure, or goals. That's not a good sign. Because of this, I hate people and they seem to dislike me. I've collected the many injustices directed at me my whole life. And injustice collectors have a favorite phrase, and that phrase is, it's not fair. I'll kill as many people as I can for my revenge. I'll dress like a commando. I'll mimic my idols who have killed before me so that people remember me and talk about me and my actions for decades. Again, just because they wear a cowboy hat doesn't mean they're a cowboy. So dressing like a commando doesn't make you one. We can beat these people. We can fight back. I'll post my words, photos, or videos of my discontent online to provide proof of either my irrational life views, religious zealotry, racial hatred, my active and untreated mental illness, and my rage against the world. And here's the critical part for us. I know the U.S. and international press and instant social media, Twitter, Facebook, etc., will expose me around the globe minutes after I'm dead or in jail because that's what they do. So this model that we have sort of created by these types of folks gives us this sense of how these acts continue to go on year after year, because the model seems to be followed, that they get a lot of coverage for what they do, and they've lived a horrible life, and now for a brief moment, even negative publicity, negative attraction seems to be what they want to get. So we look at this movement in our country away from the concept of profiling people. When I started out in the Taking Bombs book in '94, actually even in '92 when we started working on it, this beautiful 21-step profile of a workplace violence perpetrator. White male, 30 to 55 years old, owns firearms, used to be in the military. Well, that gave us one type of perpetrator, which was typically postal employees that had gone on and done shootings. That's who was doing these cases back in the 90s when I started. What we figured out is profiles don't work. We don't look at profiles or label people. We look at behaviors. I don't care what people look like. I care what they do. So if you look at this collection here of behavioral concerns. These are behaviors of concern for us if we saw these in a coworker or even somebody in our family, in somebody that we provide services to or we do business with. They're troubled, something's bothering them, they're troubling, they bother other people. Their anger is turned inward, which is typically depression. We have a sense of religious zealotry. We see a lot of discussion now about white supremacy and connection to terror groups, especially overseas terror groups. They're an injustice collector. Their favorite phrase is, "It's not fair." They're hypersensitive to being criticized. They have a type of brittle personality where they're not able to engage with people in a positive or productive way. We may see substance abuse, not typically of the alcohol or street drugs, but typically Ritalin or Adderall or stimulant drugs or anti-anxiety or antidepressant medication, which they have mismanaged, which gives them sometimes really significant behavioral issues. We may see them bullied at school or at work. We may see them being a bully in both of those places. They may have significant off-the-job or off-campus problems with no support in their lives, no significant adults or caregivers for students, and nobody in this person's adult life who can help them. So this includes domestic violence, child abuse, depression, bankruptcy, legal problems, financial problems, marital issues. Certainly, owning or possessing a gun is not a risk factor. There are lots of people that own guns that are not dangerous, but when they talk about getting a gun and practicing with it in such a way that seems they have targeted somebody, that's oftentimes an enormous red flag, as you can imagine. And then the other risk factor for me, which is probably the biggest one besides injustice collector on this list, is people who talk about school or workplace violence cases as if it were a good thing. Yeah, that guy in Vegas, he took care of business. I'm proud of that guy. I mean, that's frightening talk. That's not what a normal empathic human being says, and those people scare me. So when I hear people make jokes about going postal or harming other people, or I could come in and take a gun and shoot up this place, and then when we confront them about those behaviors, especially from an HR perspective where we discipline or terminate them, they're sort of surprised. I was just kidding. I didn't really mean it. And I say, in 2019, you can't say that stuff at work and get away with it. There are consequences for your behavior, and you can't say these things and get away with those things. You just can't. Other people are concerned. We hear this leakage, this third-party threat. Someone makes a threat to harm somebody, but not directly to the person. The kid that wants to shoot the football coach does not tell the football coach. He tells his other pals at school. Those are the ones we want to hear about. And also, especially in school environments and workplace environments, we want to create an environment where people can tell their bosses, counselors, teachers, co-workers that are in important positions, human resources, security, if that's a function, the company attorney, things like that, when they hear this type of leakage. Now, this may include things like tip lines or Crime Stoppers or WeTip for public organizations, but also, do we have a way for employees to reach out to their bosses or the department directors or HR in a confidential way through an answering machine or a tip line or a email that they can say, we need to talk about something, so that people feel like they are empowered enough to tell us if we hear about this leakage? Because as you can well imagine in my work, when I hear about this leakage and people say, well, this guy said he was going to do this, this, and this, but I didn't know who to tell, and I'm really disturbed that this person did not have the courage or the sense of who to talk to. So one of your functions in your organization, if you're in the safety and security stakeholder position, is to create a culture where people can report these third-party threats and create a process, whether it's a tip line or an ombudsman's line or an 800 number or something that you can do that says, this is what we do when we talk about sexual harassment or racial harassment or workplace threats or theft or any other ethical or organizational policy violations or legal violations that we need to know about. And so we create these systems for employees to have the courage with a capital C to tell us what's going on, so that they're not on this path from ideas to actions. So as I talked about in our discussion when we began, this video of Run, Hide, Fight done by the City of Houston, Texas and the Department of Homeland Security has been out for about 7 years now. It came out just after the Aurora, Colorado movie theater Batman shootings. You can see the bad guy again, looks like Vin Diesel. The video is good. It's not bloody. If you feel uncomfortable with the shotgun part, it's not, you don't see any blood or guts, but you could move the cursor ahead about 90 seconds and pick it up from there, and it'll give you the whole rundown of the Run, Hide, Fight possibility. Again, if I had my choice between the two, and I've shown the Run, Hide, Fight video in my training programs probably, I don't know, 700 times maybe. I like this other one better, the Cal State University system. video for Run, Hide, Fight, again, is an animation. I think it's empowering, especially for younger employees. I think it works really well if you have kids in high school and college to show in your personal life. I like the video quite a lot. I think it does a really good job. There's lots of other Run, Hide, Fight videos out there. If you're involved in schools, you may have been trained in a concept called ALICE. I don't know ALICE that well to be able to talk about it. I'm a bear of small brains, so Run, Hide, Fight, those 3 steps tend to work best for me. Let's drill down a little bit more about what we're talking about. So the run part says, get out of the building, taking as many people as you can safely to get away from the police. And you want to get out of the police way so they can come in and do their job, and you certainly want to get out of the way of the bad guy who's armed. We hide out inside the facility that you're in, break room, restroom, conference room, supervisor's office, and we barricade that room as best as we can. I'll give you some examples in just a second. We keep the bad guy out of our safe room. We spread out inside the safe room, and if this person doesn't manage to get inside, we're away from the fatal funnel. We stay away from the doorway. We've got the door locked. We've got the door barricaded. We fight back. Cover stops bullets. So a steel door, a brick wall, a concrete bollard, bulletproof glass, obviously those things can stop bullets. Wooden doors, blinds, curtains, tinted windows do not. That's concealment. Cover stops bullets, concealment hides you. You want to get behind cover if possible. And again, if we had my choice in the world, we do a 15-minute drill. This is University of California, Los Angeles had a active shooter event. The students here wrapped a cable around the door closer up at the top. They barricaded the door. The bad guy did not get in, obviously, because they're not going to push through to do this. At a mass attack event at Ohio State University, same thing. These kids put all these chairs in front of the door. Again, the bad guy's not going to push through this. If he can't get inside the door, he's not going to shoot the lock off. He's going to move on. So one of the parts of the hide part is to also barricade the door so the perpetrator cannot get inside. The toughest environments I have for these types of situations are typically the healthcare environment. So healthcare is the toughest for me because they don't lock their hospital doors for patient rooms, and they may have really good access control for certain parts like pediatrics or ICU or emergency, but not on the general main floors where oftentimes it's an open area. So the better you can get to a place where you can hide and barricade, the safer you're going to be. The chances of you surviving these events go up dramatically. So when I talk to people who have been involved in these situations, they say the same thing. I thought it was firecrackers. And I'm saying to you right here and now, you should not think about firecrackers if you hear loud bangs. The only time you should hear about firecrackers is on July 4th, and hopefully you're not at work, you're at home enjoying some barbecue. So this idea of firecrackers is kind of a statement of denial. And the other thing I hear from people is, I can't believe this is happening. And that's, again, a statement of denial as well, which is, we shouldn't hear firecrackers in an office environment or a school environment. It just shouldn't happen. And this idea of cars backfiring or firecrackers, those are statements of denial, which people don't want to say. Those are actually gunshots. Use your intuition, be safe, and think about if you have to respond in a run, hide, fight sort of way, it's going to be based on the knowledge that you're probably right. If you think it sounds like gunshots, it's not firecrackers. So take that out of your mindset. So to review, before we get to questions, run, hide, fight is the protocol for these rare possibilities. These shootings and mass attacks are impossible to predict. You're going to need to know where to go. Don't freeze, don't panic. Think first, get out of the building. Second choice, hide out inside the building. Many people as possible with you. Third choice, fight back. Safe rooms are not a perfect place. You may need to evacuate or barricade inside one for several minutes or several hours. Think about what you would need to have inside a perfect safe room: fire extinguisher, telephone line, water, blankets, a first aid kit, things like that. I oftentimes think about code words for especially paging notifications. What would you do if you put out a paging notification building-wide that says there's an emergency in the lobby, and that means an active shooter, or there's an unusual incident on the 3rd floor? That would mean active shooter, don't go there. Also, one of the things we need to talk about is the fire alarm sometimes gets pulled in these situations, and we saw that in the Parkland High School shooting where the perpetrator pulled the fire alarm. There had actually been a fire alarm earlier that day, and that's why they were confused about it. Sometimes we have seen the perpetrator pull the fire alarm to move people out of buildings so they can be shot. My thing is, if you suspect there is an active shooter situation in your building, do not leave your hiding place, or do not leave the safe place in your building if there is a fire alarm, unless you see smoke and flames. One of my partners is Bob May. He's a lawyer and he's a former fire chief, and he says buildings are safe. They have fire suppression systems and smoke alarms and water and building codes that make them, fire suppressed. So your probably safer inside the building in a workplace violence situation. If you hear the fire alarm, don't leave unless you see smoke and flames. We already talked about the police response is going to be aggressive. We want to make sure that we're out of their way. We want to make sure that we're telling them exactly what they need to know, and they're not going to provide first aid for you. You're going to need to move anybody out as necessary to get out of the building as safely as possible and get them to tourniquets and first aid outside where the hot zone is. So the idea of the safe room says that this is the best place to be, where we know that these people don't shoot through locked doors. We don't think they're not like James Bond. We don't see them impersonate police when they come in. The cops, you'll know when the police get there, you'll hear their jingling equipment and their radios and things like that. The cops are all trained in run, hide, fight. They're going to know when they get there how to get up into teams and arm themselves and come inside, especially be really cognizant of the idea that the cops are going to be wearing a myriad of different uniforms and carrying a myriad of different weapons, and the idea that they're all going to look the same is not going to happen. And then the last one, the idea of fighting back says you, with your colleagues committed to your safety, will stop these perpetrators. We can do it. The idea that they have a gun does not make them unstoppable. Keep in mind that they're not trained commandos. They don't know how to shoot on the run. They don't know how to shoot on the move. They can't shoot people that are running away very effectively. It's just not that possible because they've not trained themselves to do it. These are show up, shoot as many people as possible in the shortest amount of time in the smallest area, and then kill yourself or wait to be killed by the police or give up occasionally. We don't designate safe rooms. We don't say this area over here is where we go in an emergency. We don't designate safe rooms, and we also don't designate staging areas outside the building. If you have bomb threat or a fire threat or some other type of situation, then they say, well, go stage over in the parking lot over here by the dumpsters. I don't typically do that. I just go somewhere else and I wait to be told to come back to the building when it's safe. We don't stage for workplace violence, active shooter situations. We don't use designated safe rooms. Some of these perpetrators may be ex-employees. That's one of the reasons we don't use designated safe rooms, because they may know about it. We have seen lots of examples of targeted violence where these perpetrators go after specific employees or their ex-girlfriend or their ex-girlfriend's new boyfriend or their bosses. You're not going to have time to reason or negotiate with these people. It's not a hostage situation. Again, think of this when you look at your work environment. Some things are cover, steel, bulletproof glass, concrete, bricks. Some things are concealment, stucco walls, wooden doors. You want to get behind cover if you can. When you think about safe rooms, best and not so great, left side, lots of good things here, right side, not so good. Think about being able to lock the door without windows, off the main hallway, light switch you can turn off, barricade objects inside, phone line, first aid kit, etc. Right-hand side, not so good. Maybe in an imperfect world, especially we see this sometimes in healthcare, the best that you can do is barricade the door with whatever you have, even if it's not lockable. Stay away from the doorway, get on the floor, cut the lights, and be ready to fight back. These events in our workplaces are rare and catastrophic. They certainly make the news. These perpetrators are male lone wolf actors. They typically do not work in pairs or in groups. It's very rare. We've only had 5 cases where that's happened nationally since 92. They may use guns or knives or even vehicles, especially if we've seen overseas. No shooters breached a secure door and killed employees or students. No shooters ever pretended to be the police. We've not seen that happen. We can't predict violence, but we can certainly assess dangerousness and listen to this pre-attack leakage. And again, this is when someone says, don't come to work tomorrow. And you say, well, why not? And they go, it's going to be bad. And this idea of this pre-attack leakage is they don't tell the target, they tell people around the target. And the reasons for this are complex. Sometimes they do it because they can't help themselves. Sometimes they do it because they want to be talked out of what they're thinking about. Sometimes they do it because they actually like the people that they don't want to harm. So it's very unusual behavior, but it's something that they do a lot. And then the last one, our greatest strengths as we look at this subject are employee and management vigilance, listening to this leakage, having a rapid but measured response connected to the idea of run, hide, fight, partnerships with our safety and security stakeholders, including human resources, security if it's a function in your organization, law enforcement if you're in a public sector organization, who are the safety and security stakeholders. And then that we talk about this. We have a staff meeting once a year where we show the Run, Hide, Fight video, or we show the Cal State University version, or we have a training program after an event that's happened in the country, which we talk about and we kind of learn from. We have security plans in place. We have evacuation plans in place. We have workplace violence policies which address things like domestic violence involving an employee. And we do a drill once a year. We do a 15-minute drill once a year. So watch the video. Maybe at least once a year. Think about doing it at home, age appropriate for your kids. Think about 14, 15 and above is probably okay for this. Make sure that everybody in your staff knows how to dial 911 and what to say to the police dispatchers or the fire dispatchers, and what the difference between 911 on your landline versus 911 on your cell phone. Tell people to trust their intuition, not to stage, to evacuate safely, to get out and train themselves to get a good description of the shooter and what this person is doing. Think about buying some tourniquets for your first aid kits, put them in with your AED machines. Think about what kind of clinical resources you need to have, which may include employee assistance program providers, or a local counseling and trauma team providers in your county. That could be from county social services or a private sector organization. And then if you have this luxury, then talk to your cops in your area and say, take a look at our building, take a look at our facility, take a look at our exits and how we do things here. What information or advice do you need to have? And with that, it's time to look at pictures of my dogs. And yes, I do have 6 dogs. And the reason is 7's too many and 5's not enough. Deb, back over to you.
That's great, Steve. Thank you very much. As far as questions go, we do have a question that you kind of touched on, but maybe you can give some more insight into those types of people that have special needs. So you touched on like the hospital situation, but what about if you have like a senior care home with a lot of people in wheelchairs and walkers where they have a good state of mind, but they don't have good physical abilities. With that good state of mind, they're very aware of things like these and very worried about it. So how do you help them with their training?
Yeah, that's a big challenge. And one thing you have to think about is what are the mobility devices that we have in place? How many wheelchairs do we need? How many wheelchairs do we have access to? And are there other things, kind of like what they use to move folks around at the airport, that may not be full-on wheelchairs, but to have mobility attached to them? Can we barricade those people in rather than move them? That's one of the challenges of healthcare, especially, is we don't typically want to leave our patients alone. So we're not going to evacuate and leave them inside a building. The healthcare providers and social service providers and things like that are going to stay with them. So maybe the best way is, if we can't move people because of mobility, how do we really lock down the room that they're in? How do we barricade and make sure folks don't get inside the door?
So do specific training surrounding lockdown rather than moving, but then you come up with the challenges of you don't really want to tell potential employees where the lockdown situations are. So it's a very difficult subject to tackle. Is there a way that we can confirm where our 911 calls go with our cell phones?
Yeah, I think, if you can talk to the police that you happen to see in your community or firefighters that you know, that's one way. You can also kind of check online and say, how does this work? When we call 911 in our county, who answers? If we call 911 in our city, who answers? And especially you want to know the difference between landline versus cell, because in some states it's the highway patrol or the state police for the 911 calls on cell phones, and for others it's a landline to the actual dispatch center. So that's an important and critical distinction. Think about trying to call somebody at a concert or somewhere where there's a lot of people and you can't get through on the cell because the networks are too clogged up. That's why the landline is so important.
Okay. All right. So we do have one other question. So I just want everyone to know that this presentation was recorded, and Heffernan will make it available to everyone about a week after the session today, but the slides will be available immediately after the session on our website, and I will be sending out a URL with by email to everyone. So today you'll have access to the slide presentation, and then in about a week you'll have access to the recording. So thank you everyone for attending today's webinar presented by Heffernan. We will send information by email with instructions on how to access a copy of the presentation on our website. And thank you, Dr. Steve Albrecht, for your time and expertise today. We hope all of the attendees, sure thing. We hope all of the attendees found today's webinar to be a valuable use of your time. And be sure to join us on June 4th for HR and payroll record retention. Thank you everyone for attending today, and thank you and have a safe day. Bye-bye.